G'day guys, I'm on the island of Tabarca. It's off Santa Pola, which is in the province of Alicante. It's a very small island, but it has a lot of people on it, all of whom are tourists, or 99% of whom are tourists, I imagine. And I'll just stop myself right there. Sometimes I get home from a day out with a folder full of video clips and a stack of photos, but it can be really hard to know where do I start with all this. How can I make sense of this disparate jumble of sounds and images? Is this some sort of metaphor for life maybe? It's just a scramble of inputs out of which we need to make some sort of meaning? Well, that's where I am right now with this footage from the island of Tabarca, which I took last summer. And just reviewing the footage now, I realise I can't even get the name of the island right, let alone know what's my underlying theme or narrative that I'm trying to get at. I was just pondering this, and it occurred to me that this reflects the idea that Yuval Noah Harari has in his book Sapiens, in which he speaks about human history being a product of narratives or stories through which humans understand their surroundings and they get meaning. I'm sure I'm simplifying his argument, but that's what I started thinking about when faced with all these fragments today and wondering, how am I going to put this all together into some sort of cohesive narrative? This is history making on a much smaller scale than what Harari was talking about. I'll put the link to his book in the description. It's well worth a read. Anyway, let's get back to Tabarca, because this is a photography YouTube channel, not a philosophy or a history one much. We've come here because this place is a marine reserve and there are loads of fish. Not only are there loads of fish, the clarity of the water is actually pretty nice. Not amazing, it's pretty nice. Having said that, obviously it's an island. We had to get here by ferry. You don't have an option in terms of getting here really early, because the earliest ferry went at 9 o'clock this morning, and we have to catch the last ferry home. So instead of relying on the light, I have to rely on the subject, because obviously I have to work with this harsh midday sun. It does mean that the subject becomes more important because the light is less friendly to work with. So what I've been doing is I'm not a big fan of taking photos of fish. Fish don't really interest me, to be honest, but today I've been taking some photos of fish. Really interesting, because it's a marine reserve. There's been lots of little fish that are not afraid of humans at all, which is quite nice. They're not afraid, and they almost feed out of your hand. Not that I'm feeding them anything, but Luca was holding up some seaweed or something that he grabbed from the ground or from the seabed and was feeding them, and there are all these little sort of parrot fish, I want to say, I'm not sure, colourful fish, were coming and eating, and so I got some video of that. Underwater photography is like most photography in that the quality of light makes a big impact on the images you end up with. So I didn't go into this swim with high expectations, simply because most of the time I was here, the sun was high in the sky and quite harsh. Although it has to be said, with underwater photography, the sun is filtered by the water, so this is less of a deterrent to making images in the middle of the day. As I said on the day, because of the uninteresting light, I was more reliant on the subject, and also, it has to be said, on the composition. Like, for example, with this simple composition of Ma floating, sandwiched with the deep blue above and below her. Apart from the light, the other aspect I dealt with was the many people on the island. Unusually, I found myself in post-processing removing some unwanted people in the background. In this instance, a swimmer behind Luca is a distraction, I thought not needed. I removed this using Generative Fill in Photoshop. I do find this is a great tool for removing distractions, especially with a relatively uneventful background like this. I'm not a fan of adding objects or animals that weren't there in the first place. When I've tried this, it always looks really unnatural to me, so I avoid it. There were two things that helped to deal with the really harsh sunlight. The first thing was getting photographs with the subject a bit deeper in the water, like here, as the light had moved to act as a diffuser. And secondly, closer to the surface, where the reflection of the subject on the surface of the water was exaggerated by the strong light and led to an interesting diffraction of flesh colours on the surface. There's this section down here where people have to cross from the main island onto this tiny little island, which is where I am now, and I suspect the tide's coming in because it's actually quite deep to cross. Need to be careful with all the camera gear and so on crossing there, but anyway, did that. Here we are. Very slippery as well. I saw a guy slip over, cut his head open. He was bleeding from the head. Very, very slippery. But I haven't slipped. I did manage, while I was out there filming Luca feeding the fish, I got washed by a wave onto the rocks and I cut my leg. That's all. That was a little bit of a mishap, but I'll survive. You want to see it? Yeah. Tabarca was certainly busy. I spoke to camera about this on the day, but have decided not to include it because it comes across as negative when I don't really mean it to be. I'm one of those many people as much as everyone else making up the crowd, so I can't really complain about it. To me, Tabarca was one of those places that have become popular because it's beautiful and photogenic. But this beauty is why it's popular, more so over many years, which in turn makes it conversely less beautiful because it's full of people. That's a conundrum that's persistent with all beautiful places that become popular as a destination. Ma told me she remembers coming to Tabarca as a child multiple times and said it hasn't changed all that much. It's just that now it's busier. And unfortunately, it felt like some of the restaurants and bars were taking advantage of the captive audience with overpriced food and drink. All that being said, there's still plenty of opportunity to make some photos on the island, even with the harsh midday light and with people at every corner of the island. And while making images under the water was my priority, I did take a bit of time to take a few photos of the village and the island surrounds while I was there. Asking your subject to twist and turn while under the water can end up with some interesting poses that, when frozen in time, make the narrative of the photograph more interesting, in my view. I'm a fan of photos of people swimming or in more natural positions, but I do think asking the subject to go slightly mad sometimes can lead to some interesting results. Because I photograph my son Luca a lot, he does this without me even asking him to do it. Sometimes the best shots of the day are made in just a few seconds, where the angle of the light is right, the subject frozen in a pose that conveys some sort of narrative, and elements of composition are balanced. That's what I felt with this sequence, which turned out to be my favourite underwater photographs of the day. I continued to photograph Luca in this spot that we'd found away from the main beach, but by the mid-afternoon there are a few issues. Firstly, the sun was still throwing a harsh light on everything, and combined with a lot of sediment being kicked up, this led to quite a lot of backscatter in the images, or bits of distracting materials in the water. Secondly, it had got quite a bit busier with other swimmers, which was part of the reason for the extra sediment. As I did earlier in this image, I removed a swimmer from behind Luca so that the image was clean, clear of distraction. Just been editing and I realise I need to say a bit more about this, because removing items from within images can be seen as somewhat controversial. Once upon a time this would have been really difficult, if not impossible. When I was working in the darkroom, certainly it wouldn't have been something I'd even contemplate. Nowadays, in the digital world, I see it more akin to fixing the white balance, altering the crop, elements of lighting, etc. Masking, there's another example of something that would have been really difficult in the analog world, but is now super easy in Lightroom and Photoshop. And we kind of accept that and removing things, I think, also is an acceptable part of photography now. And it's just reflecting the evolution of photography in the same way that we don't drive around in a horse and cart because we've got cars and we've got electric cars now. And once upon a time, you know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we didn't have electric cars. Or we don't listen to music on the phonograph, we listen on our phone, on ear pods that are wirelessly connected, which would have been unimaginable, you know, 20 years ago or however long. That is just the evolution of things, and photography is no different to that. So any kind of argument about it not being authentic or not being real or true to the image or what was really there, I think is a bit of a spurious argument. That's just my personal opinion. You're free to disagree. If you do, that's great. Let me know in the comments. If you want me to make a video on this, I've got a lot of opinions. I was raised, if you like, photographically speaking, in the darkroom. I spent countless hours of my life, days, months, in the darkroom, and now I'm firmly entrenched in the digital world, and I don't think I'd leave it. But if you've got an opinion on that, let me know in the comments. Back to the edit. One last image from this particular swimming spot, and just to show you that I didn't remove all of the swimmers, as per my last comment. In this case, the swimmer next to Luca complemented the scene and the narrative, so I've left her in here. She's integral to the composition rather than being some sort of distraction. That's probably another good example of where I would draw the line with generative fill. For the final swim of the day, we moved to the main beach of Tabarca. It was towards the end of the day, so the light was much better for taking photographs. It was also right next to the port, so we were near to the ferry, so we could catch our last ferry home. Many of the day trippers had already taken an earlier ferry home, so it was much quieter, so that made for better photography conditions. We're always keen to take the last ferry home. Let me know in the comments if that's you as well. You like to take the last ferry or the last train or the last bus back to wherever you're going. I started this video saying that I was struggling to find the narrative in this set of images and videos I'd taken on the trip to Tabarca, off the coast of Alicante in Spain. And I'm not really sure, now I'm at the end of the video, if I'm any closer to any sort of cohesive narrative. But maybe that's the point. Often we experience life as a series of fragments that don't necessarily have to be significant or important in the whole grand scheme of things. We take a day trip to an island, swim, eat, rest, all that, make some photos, and then we come home again. Maybe it's these insignificant fragments which are the building blocks of our lives, the things that make us, and perhaps which are the most important. If you've made it this far, thanks very much. I truly appreciate the fact that you're watching. I've got more videos to come, under the water, over the water, and perhaps more pontificating about life in general, because I know you love that. So stick around, subscribe to my channel, give me a like if that's something you can do, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.